Podcasters Roundtable 150. We made it, Dave. But are we all just music podcasters now? That's the tease. Intro. I am going to crack a beer for 150. Cheers. Water, beer, whatever. Oh, Dave working the ones and twos tonight, Dave, if you recall. That's called a throwback or whatever callback.
Callback. There you go.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, well, let's meet the roundtable. That is co-host Dave Jackson. Welcome back.
Yeah, Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com, 150 episodes. I still remember we were, I think, at Podcast Movement, and Ray came up to me and said, hey, Google's releasing this thing, and I want to turn it into a podcast where we just get online and talk about podcasting. And I was like, wait, you want me to talk about podcasting? I'm like, okay, twist my arm if you have to.
That's right.
And,
well,
go ahead.
Well, Google's releasing technology that let us be here on video. And if we at any time, if I ever called Dave on Skype, which I had plenty of times, we, for the infamous 5-minute conversation, we'd be there for 45 minutes and we'd have all this conversation about podcasting. What else are we going to talk about? Like, of course, we're going to nerd out on podcasting. And it's like, this should be recorded. So that was the whole premise of the show. Google Hangouts made it very easy. And that drove us through over 100 episodes, I believe.
Dang.
And we pivoted after that, thanks to StreamYard. You, Dave, the lucky winner of the duck today, the little duck logo.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
My buddy.
All right. 2 new roundtablers today. Very exciting. Jordan, welcome to your first roundtable.
Thank you for having me. I'm Jordan. I'm the host of Dreamful Podcast, which is a podcast of bedtime stories accompanied by ambient music. And I can be found at dreamfulstories.com.
Yeah, very cool. So is it focused on, it's for kids or just anyone?
Your podcast isn't supposed to be just for anyone. So I had the focus for kids, but majority of my audience is actually adults.
If you want to relax, like it's a relaxing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
She has that voice and a condenser mic to go with it. So put you to sleep. I think that's a good thing, right? Though
It is a good thing. People don't make it through my episodes, which is actually good for me.
That's right. Well, then maybe they start over, and so you get extra stats.
It does the automatic play, so while they're sleeping, I'm getting the downloads.
There
you go.
Skew those stats then. All right. Well, welcome, and Bob, welcome to the roundtable.
Thank you. Hey, it's good to be a tabler. I've never been one before. Bob Bender here. I'm the co-producer and the host of the business side of music. We have about 150,000 download followers, and we're in about 60 countries as of today around the world that listen to our show. We talk about all things related to the music industry.
And what a perfect time, because I didn't name this, Are We All Music Podcasters Now? Because you were coming on. You just happened to be on a show where we're going to talk about sort of a new development that involves music. So that'll be interesting. So perfect timing to have you on here. And to check out my lower third. That's a vote box, people. All right. Here in the U.S., you may have heard we're going to have an election. Maybe.
Really?
Maybe. Dave,
soon?
Maybe. Just vote. Okay. If you're in the U.S., just vote. That's my PSA for that. So. All right. So let's get to that first story. And this is, again, based on, I teased the title, Are We All Music Podcasters Now? No, we're not. But this might give you something you've wanted. Dave wants to have AC/DC in his intro.
I do.
For every show. Maybe he can now. Jordan, what is this? What is this story?
Well, so a couple of weeks ago, Spotify announced that they are integrating their music platform with podcasting. However, the catch is that you have to be hosted on Anchor, and your podcast can only be distributed through Spotify.
So not a podcast.
Yeah. There are some cool things, like they do sort of like integrated chapter markers where you can actually select the songs. My big caveat with this, I think it's very exciting for some music podcasters if they do it correctly. My big issue with it is that the song must be played through in its entirety and cannot be altered in any way, shape, or form, which means you cannot speak over it, you cannot shorten it. So probably not the best intro music for Dave.
Yeah.
And for Spotify users that are not on the premium membership level, the songs will only be the 30-second clips. There's a couple other things, like you cannot, if you are doing the music because of the licensing with Spotify, you cannot have the support the show link enabled. And they have some things with advertising as well. So it makes things a little tedious.
Yeah. When I first heard about this, actually it was really exciting, just because we've heard for a long time that the space, the industry, whatever, is trying to find some way to let podcasters use licensed music easier. And so this was something that I think we had hypothesized, this doesn't sound right, that we had thought about happening possibly when when podcasts went to places like Spotify and Pandora, that maybe at some point there would be some link and they'd open up the catalog. And that's what they did. Now you do have to create on Anchor. And I joke that it's not a podcast because from a technical perspective, it's sort of a feature of Spotify. You can't do this anywhere else. You would have to listen on. Wait, you have to listen. You can't distribute somewhere else, obviously. So it's all Spotify driven. So
it is all Spotify.
Yeah. So for me, it wasn't exciting for podcasters how I first saw it pitched. For me, it's exciting because it's a whole new. I think it's the birth of a whole new content creator, and it's sort of the rebirth of the DJ, right? In theory, we're going to have music, people who are going to like guide tastes in music. You're going to discover new music. You're going to like one quote unquote podcast. You're going to like a host in how they discuss music, and you're going to discover music that way or listen to music that way. So I think there's a new genre of creator that this creates. And obviously, yes, it also seems like it is a be careful type thing, because you're building on their platform, and at any moment they can take it away from you. And it's not like a podcast where you can just go somewhere else. You're done, right? You're done. So I don't know, Bob. Oh, go ahead, Jordan.
Oh, sorry. That's kind of the other thing, is that Spotify, if they decide that they're going to take off a song, or the person who's hosting the song on Spotify for any reason decides to remove it, it will also be removed from your podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, and so that creates, imagine, here's what I'm thinking, like you introduce a song, say something, and then play it. So they would just yank the song out, right? And then you're just like, where did the song go, dude? That could create real archive issues.
Let me share what happened to us. We had Ken Mansfield on the show, who was the general manager of Apple Records for the Beatles. And he was one of the few gentlemen that was on the rooftop when the Beatles did their final concert. And so we had this great story. He was just sharing all this wealth of information. And so during the show, during our breaks, because we take 2 commercial breaks in each episode, we went in to play just some really minute cuts of Beatles off of the Let It Be album, just to kind of play in part with what we were talking about. And Tom Sabella, who's my partner and co-producer on the show, one of the first things he says to me is, well, we just got kicked off of YouTube because we can't incorporate even 15 seconds of a Beatles song onto a show. So we had to go back in, we had to remove the songs, re-edit it, and resubmit it so we could get it to play. And it took away some of the impact we were trying to make on that particular episode. And it was nothing more than a licensing issue. Back then we kind of thought, okay, 10, 15 seconds, we're going to be okay. But no.
Mm-mm. No, you can't
Especially
have.
now, the bots have rolled in. Those days are
let me go back and say, we also interview a lot of up and coming independent artists or artists that were once assigned to labels, who now are doing their own projects, and we can play their songs in its entirety with their permission. And of course, it's always in our show notes and our credits, and we don't have that problem.
The problem is, though, again, sorry, Dave, the bots, right? If you were to try to put this on YouTube, it could get dinged. And what about when they get signed? Like, music that's not yours is just avoid. Like, it's just avoid it, right? Like, if you don't want any issues. But, Dave.
Well, you've got 3 things you need. You need permission of the songwriter. So that could be Prince. the song performer. That could be the time, and then the song is, I don't know, whatever, Jungle Love. So, and then you need permission of Warner Brothers, who owns the mechanical rights. So even if Warner Brothers kicks them off their record label, they probably still own the rights to that. So Prince might go, that's all right, play it anyway. Morris Day might go, please, I need the exposure. But if Warner Brothers doesn't say, and that's cool, you got 2 out of 3, and next thing you know, you get Shazammed, and you're like, oops, got to take that down. It's a bummer.
That's the point. That's the whole point that's why this is interesting, right? In terms of, again, if it's not your music, even if you have an artist that gives you permission, they might not be able to give permission. Like in general, you avoid it in your podcast. It just to make your life easier, or at the worst, avoid huge fines or getting kicked off, right? But now, I mean, the Spotify catalog's got most of what you'd want to.
Right. And you've got to do some talking. When I first heard about this, I said, does anybody have any real life examples of this? Because there have been people in the past who have tried to be like the DJ, and they're like, here's the new one from the Beatles. And then they'll be like, and here's some Kanye. And it's like, there's very little talking in it. And Spotify does not want that. They don't want to have a majority music, because if you want to listen to music, they want you to go over and listen to the music. So this almost sounds, I haven't played with it yet, but when you're using Anchor, you can bring in like some sort of transition music, and then you record something, you drag it in, and then you drag in the sound of a cow and whatever, and it stitches it all together. This sounds like you're just like, hey, here's my favorite song from Joe Bonamassa. He's a great blues guitarist. He's, blah, blah, blah. And then you my guess is you play this song, and then you do your next one. You say, all right, that was Joe Bonamassa. Now we're going to do this guy, Stevie Silas. He's played with Rod Stewart. He's played with all these people. Great guitar player. I love this song. Well, and then I don't think you're sitting there listening to the song because they don't want you to talk over it. So, and I think that's the way she was saying, is like, if they later say, oh, sorry, we're pulling it, I'm going to pull a Taylor Swift and pull my music. And then you're stuck with a weird spot. So that's why I want to play with it.
It would be nice if they notified you so you could at least then go in. Cause I think it's a chunk, right? You chunk of your recording, then the music, then you just pull it out.
It's very similar to the way that they do their dynamic ad insertion on Anchor, where it's just like a cut and paste and, all this stuff. So they do the same thing, but I mean, along with that, they do want talking in between it. You cannot have just a playlist. Essentially, they're saying if you are going to make a playlist, just do a playlist. But if you do want to use their dynamic ad insertion, you have to have 10 minutes of talking before you have that ad inserted. Yeah. So they do want to have that. You can do their monetization thing, but it's only on Anchor, and you're only going to go through Spotify. So,
well, then the other fun thing is, what if you have a website and you try to embed the Spotify player? Like, that gets weird all of a sudden. So that's another one where they're probably going to play maybe a 30-second clip. Or are you able, and can you have, you're like, okay, I can't monetize. Maybe you can, I don't know, but can I have my own sponsor and have it on my website? It sounds like you can't, but that's why I want to get in and play with it. It sounds great. And I'm with Ray. I think this is a baby step towards, somewhere down the road where we can eventually have something to, so I can play AC/DC on my podcast.
Well, there's so many, so I'm a member of a pretty large podcast group on Facebook, and I cannot tell you how many times I see people posting, that they want to play a 15, I just want to do 10 seconds of the song. I just want to do 15. They want to so bad. And so I'm kind of hoping that Bob can bring some insight to this.
Don't do it.
Don't do it. But if you were to, who would you go through? That'd be appropriate.
With us, it's now what we're doing is it is the independent songwriter. We make sure that they own all of the property, that we are not dealing with a label. We're not dealing with an outside publisher. Excuse me. Because you just don't need those headaches. And look, we're all in podcasting. I hope we're all in it because we love it. and we do it because it's a passion. Very few of us are doing it and making any money. And Tom, my partner, will tell you, every month we're just shelling out money, so you don't really want to create any more dynamics that's going to cause any kind of financial heartache. So I'm going back to what I've said earlier. We focus primarily these days. Well, in fact, we focus solely on the indie artist that owns their music. And that's the only thing that we showcase on our show now, because we just don't want to get into any more hiccups like we did, when we tried to play snippets of the Beatles. And once again, we tried it. It didn't work. We won't do it again. We are not getting kicked off of YouTube, and hopefully this won't implement that, because if it is, then I'm coming back to you. But we are having success with the independent artist, and the independent artist is loving it at this point, because it's another platform for their music to be heard, along with the whole interview aspect of what's going on. We'll spend 30-40 minutes talking to the artist and maybe play one, possibly two songs, or at the end of the show play a song, after we've gone in depth with them.
And that's just it. I mean, but the problem is the new podcaster wants their favorite Rush song.
Yeah.
On Axl Rose. Yeah. They want,
we all do, but it ain't going to happen.
Right. Well, people learned it, but it's this dynamic. We were kind of talking about price of microphones, and the way you see that when you're a new podcaster, where $100 is crazy, whereas after you've done 50 episodes, you're like, I understand how much time I'm going to be in front of this thing. $100 not as much of a big deal, because it's more of an investment. But
well, and I had somebody that thought they'd found the way around it, and what they did is they knew musicians and they recreated the song. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't Big Star singing it anymore. Covers. Yeah, and it wasn't the recording, so it wasn't the label. And I'm like, and you got permission from the songwriter, right? And they went, oh, and I'm like, again, 2 out of 3, it's great, but you got to get that person. And I'm like, you never, it's they put that together, they created it. And if you're making money off this, and then some people are like, I'm not making money off this, and I'm like, nope, that doesn't matter either. So I mean, it's just tricky.
We're creators, and we don't want our stuff stolen, essentially, right, or used without our permission. I mean, if you put Creative Commons license on it, but that music doesn't have Creative Commons license on it. So, right, the question, I guess, is also why did Spotify introduce this? They're a major company, probably bleeding money. I mean, there's something here. And what we talk about podcast and podcast coming to Spotify is this is a bunch of ear time that they can monetize against, and they don't have to pay. They don't pay podcasters, right? Which is a potential problem, right? It was we're feeding that into their pocketbooks, because when people stream music, they have to pay for it. So this now gets people to stream. They can stream music, but like you're saying, Jordan, it has to be 10 minutes or whatever. They're still slowing that time down, right? So there's still time where dialogue is taking up, and they're not paying. They're not paying you for your part of the show. They are paying the artist when they play it off of their song. So it's sort of that in between. Like, it probably still, when you add it up over many shows, it still saves them quite a bit of money.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, and they are paying the artists for the songs that are
right
in your podcast as well, too. Right. So
maybe they'll pay us someday.
Sure.
I don't think the artists make it. It's pennies anyways. It's just like Anchor advertising. Come on.
I'll take it.
I'll take it.
Yeah. Well, and I think kind of like what you said, we've all were like, man, it would be great if I could play my favorite song. And so this is one of those where I think, and I don't think they're doing this on purpose. I think sometimes we have selective hearing. And so when somebody says, hey, Spotify lets you play music on your podcast, and somebody's like, what? Oh, yeah, all you have to do is host on Anchor. Well, that's it. I'm going to Anchor. And then nobody says, oh, by the way, it's only this. And oh, by the way, only people that pay for Spotify Premium can hear it. No, by the way, you're not going to be on Apple. You're not going to be on Google. You're not going to be on Amazon. They kind of leave that part out. It's just like, hey, you can play music over here. And I was like, same thing with Anchor. Hey, we can submit your show to all these directories for you. They just, oh, by the way, you're going to lose all control over your show and Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and Spotify and Stitcher and all the other ones. It's like they kind of forget to mention that while you still own your show, you're not going to be able to see all those fancy stats in there. So I think sometimes either through excitement or just, And we'll talk about that later, kind of strategies. People just jump in, not really realizing, what's going on. They don't know the big picture.
Anchor's kind of like the guy in the van with the free candy right now.
Oh, that's not, you don't want to be compared to that guy.
No, you don't.
The big, and again, I already said this, but the big gotcha for me is that this is so unique that you could pour, as podcasters, we pour all our spare time into our podcast for a big part of it. And it's not even like YouTube. Like if I'm a video creator and I go to YouTube and YouTube shuts down my channel, which they've done before, or turned off monetization, whatever, and there's nothing I can do about that. I mean, if YouTube,
Right.
if you violate some terms of service on YouTube and they turn off your channel, you've just lost your audience. There's people who have millions of subs and they're just cut off, right? If you did not get those people somewhere else, like an email list, which if you're going to do this in your show, get people moved to an email list, because at least you'll still have contact with whoever, the people who most want to stay in contact with you. But this is, again, you're going to spend all your time building this show, curating music. And if Spotify says, that's it. Like there's no going anywhere else. At least a video creator, I can go to Vimeo or my own website. This is over because you can't play music through Spotify. So
I want to
sidebar.
I want to sidebar there real quick too, because email list is one of your biggest assets.
Yeah.
To start and maintain and build, and it's so important. But remember that especially like we do a newsletter, it's something that they may unsubscribe to or want to be taken off the list. So take that into consideration. But we are constantly every week adding to our email list of people that are reaching out to us. So that's an important thing to keep in play, is an email list.
Yeah.
Yes.
As old as it seems, it's still very effective. Most people read their emails. And again, I think most new podcasters, if you say, oh, what's that one thing you would have done differently, start that list, right? And get it on your show, get people moved over. Because again, these are your, it's the 1,000 true fans type thing, right? These people are going to sign up, not all of them, but of the people you don't want to lose contact with, those people are probably going to be on the email list.
Absolutely. And these, because you think about it, on a podcast, you're on a treadmill, you're in the car, you're something, and they're like, oh, I should probably, I'll have to remember to go back to the show notes and click on that later. And then they never do. Where now you are literally one click away from clicking on the thing I want you to click. And as Bob said, you want them to stay subscribed. So you still have to put out, valuable stuff. But if you work up a good headline, and, that's what I look at. The headline, I'm like, oh, do I want to read that? And if I do, I open it and then I click on it. And if you're trying to monetize or whatever, it's just another way to stay in contact with your audience.
And that's something that Tom is doing, who handles all the back end of our podcast, is he's constantly looking at those bullet points, those key words, to engage the listener or the reader of our newsletter to click on it. Because you're right, you want those clicks, you want them to attach themselves to your show.
Who's going to try this? Dave, we have.
I definitely want to try it. I don't know if I'm going to try it anytime soon, but I just want to go through the process just so I can see how they're doing it, and so I can talk about it intelligently. At this point, I'm kind of like, well, I think they're doing this. I haven't really done it yet. And I know I have a couple people that have tried it that said it's pretty simple. So, it's just a matter of you have to set your expectations that you're not going to get. Yeah, I could be wrong, but the OG podcast for me goes, wait a minute, a podcast without Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, Overcast, it's just Spotify. And I was like,
I mean, we could split hairs over if it's a podcast or not. It's not. I mean,
right.
And that's just literally just for definition. I think the important factor there is what you just said. When I say podcast, more and more every day, people think, well, okay, so how do I get that on my podcast? I use Apple, or I use Pocket Casts. Like, how do I get it on even if they don't know it's, what it is, it's my podcast app. It's how I listen. Right. So you're like, oh, you can't. So, I have at work, we have some people who do video. We do like a video, and they'll say, welcome to the podcast in the thing. And I say, Don't say that, because then people want to know how do you subscribe it, and you absolutely can't in a podcast directory. So I think that's the reason why, to me, that's important, but also because it implies, that it is kind of available in all these other places, which in this case it's not. So whether you want to argue or not of whether it's a podcast or not, and technically it's not, but I also am interested to see, because this is going to create a few, Spotify is going to, the way they did with podcasts, they hired people to be in a Spotify exclusive podcast. They're paying them. They're going to scoop up a couple people who are sort of these tastemakers in music. I mean, when people, it's kind of like a farm league that they can pick from, because they're going to, then they're going to have like the prog rock channel, and you're going to have some person who's curating that, probably with a much more capable show where they can talk over music. When Spotify says, hey, we'll pay you $40,000 a year to curate this show, and now you have a full-time job. So I think that'll be interesting. Again, I think it creates a new genre of creator. It's not podcaster. It's not video.
I don't even know if it is a new genre of creator, because I believe that Spotify even, kind of nods to the old days of radio. I think that's just a new way of making your own Spotify radio station, and you're the DJ and you're the one talking it up. So I don't even know if it actually is a new genre.
Right. It's internet DJ, right? It's a thing that we grew up on, which is the DJ who you turn to because you liked either what they had to say alongside the music. And sort of, you're like, yeah, I got a lot of my music taste from so-and-so on this station, or whatever it is, brought to the internet, right? We couldn't really do that because of all the things that Bob has talked about and experienced. It wasn't legal to do that. So now at least you have access to a massive major label catalog that you can do this thing. And I think in that way, we're going to see, the way podcast sort of democratized kind of radio show for everyone, kind of a talk show, maybe AM radio, NPR, anyone could sort of have their own show. Now anyone can kind of be their own DJ. But again, huge caveats. We'll see. Well, I think it's neat, but it's careful because it can be taken away from you, whereas a podcast can't.
Yeah, there was, I don't know if you remember, Live 365 was it was a streaming platform, and you would upload your audio to that, and you could actually upload music because they paid the royalties on it. But the bad news was nobody was listening to online radio. It was there. And at the time, Windows had a radio section. Apple used to have a radio section. It used to have a streaming radio part, but just, you weren't, you could see you were getting, a couple hundred people across the globe, which was cool, but it just wasn't what you wanted to be. And what's interesting is when I listen to music on occasion, I will turn on satellite radio, and it reminds me of the good old days where somebody be like, hey, here's the new one from whatever, Motley Crue. Hey, remember when they said they were never going to tour again? Guess what they're doing next summer? They're touring again. And I'm like, I don't hear that information anyplace else. So there's a guy here in Cleveland that, I mean, look, to me, radio is nails on a chalkboard. I can't take it. But this guy comes on from 7 to midnight every Saturday, and I actually have my phone alert me because it's all request. And it's literally people call up and the guy knows his stuff. And it's like, I'm like, why isn't radio like this all the time? So hopefully this will be something kind of like that, just with, a couple large hurdles to get through to hear it.
Well, and it also has what podcasts have, where it's not confined to the rules of radio.
Right.
It's not, you don't have necessarily a boss or someone, a director telling you what to do. So what can be created? I have a little notepad down here with like 4 ideas that I was like, this is something different. This is what I would like to see the radio do. And niche focus, like take podcasting's power of niche, and I think, and apply it here, and you might have something very interesting. But I'm also interested to see what people come up with. Am I going to be listening to these stations? Probably not, but but I am interested for creators who want to do this. I will be watching closely to see,
You'd be one of the first listener to Dave Jackson's Electric Groove Crusade.
Yes. Yeah, I subbed or whatever you have to do on Spotify already, Dave. I smashed that like button.
You followed it, yeah.
See, so Jordan, as I said, sometimes one story takes up half the show. We've done it.
We did it.
We did it. Half the show gone. So
I can mark that off my bucket list, taking up
Yeah.
half your show.
There you go.
right.
150.5.
150.5. All right, so we are. Is that our radio? It's like our call sign. 150.5.
I think that is
the Roundtable.
the Roundtable.
Hold on, let me put this. Let me put some digital effects on this new microphone I got here. Radio voice, high compression, Dave. High compression and lots of low end, right?
That's it.
You have a radio mic there, Dave. Sporting the 320.
Yeah, I can turn up the compression. I can just go crazy on the big bottom here on the Roadcaster and just.
Well, you have radio shows. You could Binky and the Wiz us or something.
That's it.
All right. Bob,
Sorry
why
to
don't you
start
give
that.
us a story? So we can actually get 2 stories in here. You pick one of your stories here.
Oh, me?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, the biggest thing that we've noticed in the last, obviously, months with the whole COVID pandemic thing is the shutdown of the music industry. And maybe shutdown is too kind. It's cratered. We have seen the destruction of the music industry, especially here in Nashville, Tennessee. This is probably, so I'm going to use that and say, look, as a producer of a podcaster, and we're using this ourselves, now is the perfect time to work on your show and get it better. If you're just starting out, figure out what it is that you're going to do. If you're like us, well, in fact, I'll back up a little bit. Back in February, we decided to start doing webcasting. So we had a great studio in Franklin, Tennessee, 3-camera shoot, all the technical aspects you could want to do a great video podcast, a webcast. And we loved it, and it was amazing. And we released our first episode, and 3 weeks later, boom, we're dead because of the pandemic. The studio is shut down, and so now what do? So Tom and I have taken some time to really restructure things. We have now turned a spare room in my house into a production facility to where we can bring people in who feel safe enough to come in and do something much like this. It could be a guest or 2 guests or 3 guests. And we're doing a 3-camera shoot. We're developing some new ideas and some directions, but now is the time to really begin thinking about how you can make your show that much better, because we have these things, the cell phone, and that's, everybody's got a 7-second attention span, or they're going to go to Netflix, or they're going to go to Amazon, or wherever it is that, TikTok. We have to figure out ways to keep them engaged. And I brought that up earlier, or at least get them to come back and listen to the show or see the show. So this is the perfect time to start really figuring what that is, because we're in so much uncharted water right now. We're all trying to figure it out. And I don't think there's a simple answer. I don't think there's a single answer, but this is the time to make your show work.
Why don't we blend that with your other story then? Because it goes right into it, right?
Yeah. So the other thing we had going on is there's this whole virtual conference, and because of the music industry, and especially here in Nashville, we have things like CMA Music Fest. We have Bonnaroo. We have the NAMM show, the Summer NAMM show every year. We have Country Radio Seminar. We have the Americana Fest, and they're all gone, at least until, some of them we're not going to see till 2022 if they come back, if they recover. So now we're starting to see virtual trade shows. We're starting to see virtual conventions. We're starting to see virtual interaction. Now, there's a part of me that is struggling with the mindset of an avatar and being in rooms with other people and to me, I'm a very one-on-one person. I want to be able to shake your hand or bump your elbow or, pump fist or whatever it is, and have that conversation in person. And we're just not able to do that. So, these virtual rallies, these virtual conferences, it seems to be that there are definitely some entities out there trying to make this the new norm. And I know that with one of the companies we're working with, they're trying to bring us in and be a part of that. And I'm just not quite sure where that fits in at least in the podcast world. I'm not even quite so sure yet if it fits in the music world, but especially in the podcast world. But you have this virtual environment out there, that may be the next step for us, at least maybe not for my demographic, but maybe for the younger demographic who grew up playing SimCity or any other video game out there. That's kind of a direction that I think some of us are starting to head.
Well, and so ever since the pandemic started, we've kind of seen this, right? Conferences going virtual, and not even like in a virtual reality way, just a Zoom conference, right?
Yeah.
And so I think in the beginning it was, I'm sure if you're listening to this, you probably attended one, or maybe did something through your work, where you had a retreat all day. Anyways, where you kind of met up on Zoom, maybe had breakout groups, but you had large numbers of people on Zoom. Dave, I think Podcast Movement we're sort of right in the middle of that. And that's
it just ended
conference.
yesterday.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they went virtual. I mean, everyone, it's either do or don't. And why not, right? Like, what is interesting to me about the virtual event is that it offers people who didn't have the resources or ability to travel to an event to participate. And so, hopefully this is temporary, and we're kind of all expecting that it is, even though it's a long temporary situation. I don't find myself attending them, but I do think having access to this is good, again, because it allows more people. Even at work, we've seen some of these virtual conferences. The numbers, I mean, from a business perspective, the overhead is so much lower and more people join because more people can. So from a business perspective, it seems potentially good. I just wonder if people fatigue on it. And, we're all fatigued on Zoom. So I think that this time it'll be a blend. What it will show you is that even if you have a conference that's in person, you need a virtual element, I think. And,
I think,
and having another way for other people to participate who can't be there in person or even don't want to be is probably a great thing to have.
I think a perfect example that's getting ready to take place is Indie Week up in Toronto, Canada. They've been doing a live event for 18 years, 11,000 people in attendance, 200 different types of music venues and events on their calendar, and they're all virtual this year. And so I think that's going to be a good litmus test. I don't think it's going to be the litmus test, but I think it's going to be a good one. So it's once again, we're all kind of throwing a hook into the water and seeing what we can catch and what's going to make sense. I'm going to go back to what I said in the beginning. This is the perfect time to start figuring out what's going to work for you. May not be the right answer, but at least you're going in a direction.
Well, the other thing that I see as an opportunity is the quote big shows are just now starting to come back, and I just noticed that many of them, their new season is 4 episodes, and I'm like, what? And I've also seen things. There was a thing on Netflix. I forget the guy's name. Was a comedian. He's had specials, and it was literally, let's get a bunch of comedians together, send them to a cabin, and then hijinks will ensue. And it was just, I kept watching episode after episode going, this has to get better. And it was just horrendous. So for me, this time is hey, you know what? The bar is getting lower and lower. And if we can raise our bar a little bit, we can be just as entertaining as 3 drunk comedians in a cabin in the woods. So, but the other thing with live events, the one thing I think they're missing, and the reason that I think a lot of times Ray and I go, they need to create the virtual hallway. I love the sessions, but a lot of times I've learned more things in the hallway and this isn't a crack on the speakers, but more than I did in the sessions. I mean, one of my favorites, I was at Podcast Movement, and they bust us to some place, and I ended up spending about 45 minutes with Michael Stelzner as he told me about a project he tried and it didn't work. He'd spent thousands of dollars on it. He was going to shut it down. And it was just me and him. And I was like, holy cow, what I would pay to get this information. And I've met some really cool people and things like that. And they had a chat room at Podcast Movement, but it was more like, I don't know, a billboard. If we go back to the days of, you just kind of, hey, everybody, this is me. Come listen to my podcast. And the next post would be, hey, come listen to my podcast. I'm like, well, that's not really, I didn't find it that useful.
What
but
they do, it's virtual, so you can mess around with things, right?
Right.
Like you just have like, call it the hallway, which is like essentially a breakout room. And
Mhm.
either randomly puts you in front of someone on Zoom, that might be a little weird for people, or you can click.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm at Podcast Movement and I see someone I know who but they don't know me, I'm going to walk over and at least join a conversation, but it's practically eavesdrop, or I'm going to wait. Like, they could recreate something where you could meet people who are at the conference that necessarily like you wouldn't be able to meet before. So you have access, right? So if you could maybe you could ping someone and say, hey, just say hi. And if they want to talk to you, so it's not this situation where people are just forced in front of you, you can join a Zoom one-on-one, right? Like I could tap Dave Jackson on the shoulder and we could enter a breakout room and have a conversation.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so they tried doing that where you could add interests or what you were involved in, and then people could search. But my experience anyway, the only thing that really came of that is people looking to
Creepers.
sell me on and essentially what Dave was talking about with that hallway, that chat box, really for almost all of those chats that were just like the public or the networking event kind of things, it was just very like spammy, look at my podcast, which you get that in Facebook
they need to
groups
moderate
anyway.
it. Like it just needs to be more heavily moderated. Maybe
Mhm.
it's even more premium so that like it's a more valuable experience because people paid more to get to, you know what I mean? You have
Yeah.
to,
I like that
you need
idea.
those two things. Like it just has to be, you don't moderate a hallway, but in this case you do.
I didn't go to it last night, but I forget the name of the system they were using it was something like Swap Card, but they had been testing these things with these little virtual rooms. And I think that's what last night was. And I didn't get a chance to attend, but I think it was more of because remember, it was really cool. You go into a room and you could hear, they had like 4 rooms going with 10 people in each room. And you could ever so slightly hear the other rooms in your headphones. It was like the murmur effect, which was, it sounded like you were there. And I really liked that. And I just, unfortunately, because I saw where you had to go to a different system. They were like, click here to go to such and such. And I was like, I bet that's what the thing is. And I would have loved to had one of those going through the whole thing. Like, hey, if you don't want to go to a session,
Right.
There's a bunch of people over here just yakking it up.
And then they'll figure it out, right? This is
That's true.
Either you evolve or you die. Like you adjust, right? You have to pivot with what's going on. And so they'll try things like that. It won't work. And if they make it work, then they'll succeed. So I'm excited to see. I just think that moving forward, this whole virtual thing probably is going to be something you run alongside a live conference.
And why wouldn't you? Because if I can get the guy from England and Africa and Egypt now to attend, but they wouldn't if they had to come here, why wouldn't you make it easier for that person?
Yeah. And Jordan.
She's scratching her head. That was not a question.
The cat creeped in, and I said, I was like, the cats do good things for videos, so we could go viral here. But
yeah, he's pretty aggressive, so
that's pretty funny.
I was having a hard time getting him down.
Let's move into your story here, the Buzzsprout, which is kind of goes with the first story with Spotify and Anchor.
Does it? Well, actually it does. It does tie in. Oh man, I am dunking on Anchor tonight. Great.
There you go.
Here we go. All right.
They're not listening.
So, essentially, this article is saying that Buzzsprout has added the locked tag feature for the RSS feed, which they added it so that you can, use a toggle in the account, and then that way your podcast RSS feed cannot be imported into another podcast host, because what has been happening is people are going to Anchor, taking your RSS feed, uploading it, slapping in that dynamic ad insertion, and sitting back and monetizing. I don't know how much they make on that. I don't know
A
a whole lot
penny.
about that. A penny.
The typical, well, here's the thing. It's popular shows like Lore, which
Yeah.
gets thousands of downloads. And every time I've played with Anchor, the only sponsor I get is Anchor, which is always interesting because their business model is, oh, we make money on ads. I'm like, but the only ad I see is the one where you're still losing money. But okay. And every time I've seen that, it's been a penny per download, basically $10 per 1,000 downloads. So, but if I can get a show that gets thousands of downloads, and
could potentially make, let's say you made $20,
right.
But you just uploaded a bunch of different RSS feeds. So in essence, what they're doing is, I believe they're checking against the email address that was used to register the RSS feed in the first place, the one that locked it. I know that Transistor also enabled this feature. They're asking other podcast hosts to do the same, because the only way in which it works is if everybody is utilizing this feature from, I believe it was the Podcast Index that started this.
Yep.
But
it's
I don't know. I think it just makes things a little bit harder for podcast pirates. I don't know what the answer is. I'm not the person in the room talking about this, but I kind of feel like there's ways around it, possibly.
Oh, there's always, you know what I mean? It's like you can always probably, but I don't know. It's been this way with domains for years. If you go to transfer a domain from like GoDaddy to Namecheap, there's a lot of like handshaking that has to go on. You have to go to the one and get a special secret code, and then it's going to ask you for the double secret code, and then you do the hokey pokey and you turn yourself around, and only then will your domain transfer to the other thing, which is good because you don't want people to go, wow, I would love to have that domain, and then just somehow hack it and then they own it. So it's not hard. It's just you have to kind of go, oh, wait, hold on, I got to do this. Now I wait for that email. Yes, I approve. And now the next one says, so I could see doing that, which would kind of be good because a lot of people, some people like to transfer from host to host like they do socks, and thinking that's going to get them more of an audience. And in the end, it's like, maybe not. In the process, they end up losing some of their audience. And I'm like, yeah, just easy on that, So if they had to actually go through just one more little hurdle, they might think about, putting some effort into the show.
The biggest problem here, and Anchor is a bit of a double-edged sword, and that's why it comes up a lot, right? Like, it's very cool that someone can try podcasting with little effort or very few barriers to get in the way, right? Some people who wouldn't have tried podcasting because they didn't know how the heck to start a podcast can now do that on Anchor, but because of this, it's filled with garbage, broken shows, people who didn't try. There is a crazy number. I wish Daniel was here. He could give us the number of like something like 60% of all the new podcasts in the last 2 years or year has been Anchor podcast, and a large percentage of those are one episode and they're test. They're junk, right? So what needs to change is, and Spotify said, I think in that article, they're looking into it. They also have this weird sort of non-barrier to getting an app. Like, for some reason, Anchor shows in Apple just get approved like automatically or something. And so there are problems here that were created by Anchor that hopefully Spotify will start to shore up. They should spend one day with the Google team and figure out how they did this on YouTube, because that's, people steal YouTube channels all the time. And now YouTube it'll notify you if it finds duplicate content, which is essentially copy paste of your content. You'll know about it and you can have it taken down. So that, these platforms are new to this, so I'm hoping they'll catch up that way. It took YouTube
you would almost wonder why we haven't learned what the record business went through in the late 90s, early 2000s.
We don't learn from history, Bob.
I-
Clearly, anywhere. All right.
I remember working at the label and my boss telling me, we're getting out of the singles business because there's no money in singles. We're just going to sell albums now. And within 2 years, we're all scratching our heads because you had things like Napster and Kazaa, Morpheus, who are just pirating music. And it's crap that they're putting out there, but people are listening to it because A, they're not having to pay for it, and it's just very easily accessible. In the record business, and I come from that background, so shame on us, we didn't figure out a way to, have gatekeepers, have security in place to prevent those things from happening. And so it's kind of the same conversation we're having with podcasting. We better figure out some ways to safeguard this because we've got to protect our assets. These are our babies. These are our creations.
I love the fact that, the record labels for a while, I think it was Apple had DRM, digital rights management, which means that you could download it on one computer, but you had to go through hoops to get it on your second computer and this and that. And then Audible came on and they had podcasts you had to pay for. And their answer was, oh, we'll put in digital rights management. I'm like, I don't know if you noticed this. That did not work over here.
Right.
So why are we? It's kind of bizarre that way.
Yeah, didn't learn the lesson.
No.
Everybody's got to repeat the same mistakes. Yeah, so this is interesting, and I don't know that. So if you use Buzzsprout or Transistor and you put on the podcast lock, which is just a tag, who sees that? Anchor sees that, but no one's implementing it, right? Like, so it exists, but no one's obeying it. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. So it's embedded in the RSS feed, and it's like podcast lock, right? And then it has your email, and so what that's supposed to do is, with that integration, it's supposed to notify the host that the RSS feed is being imported to that. This is
the host, but you say the host because this is implemented on the host side. So
exactly, it's the host side. So
it's notifying the directory side, like
exactly.
Anchor's a host too, but Spotify maybe sees that there's a lock, so
I believe it's only the distribution host. So that's kind of the other thing. I don't know all the details of this. I kind of looked in like their little comment thing, but it's little above my understanding. But I believe it's just for the hosts that it sort of flags the podcast when somebody tries to import a locked RSS feed. I don't know if that applies to if you're hosting your own RSS feed, which I know you guys.
Yeah, that'll be interesting because I don't know. I don't think it stops it. It's just letting you know, hey, somebody's stealing your content.
Also, the problem is that we see new namespaces out. No, Apple doesn't take this stuff most of the time.
Well, that's the whole point of the podcast index is like, hey, we have some really good ideas. And it used to be that Apple would come down from the mountain with their tablets and go, we've come down with some wonderful things for you. Look at this. We've got cereal versus, blah, blah, blah. And we all kind of went, you know what? Anybody else notice that we don't have any say in what happens there? And that's what was really kind of weird when they came down with episode numbers and serial and the other one and blah, blah, blah. And everybody went, that's good. We're cool. We're not going to use, we kind of like just went at Apple. And I was like, well, that's a little different. So I think this is an effort to say it's weird. They're kind of trying to do an end around Apple in a way. And they've got some great ideas like, hey, let's put a thing in there for transcripts and let's do this locking thing.
But is there such a thing as an indirect? I mean, if Apple's not doing it, does it matter? Like 70% of I mean, like
that's the question.
You can't end around Apple, like not right now. I mean,
and they don't,
I'm missing something, but
I don't know Apple, but I don't know many people that respond well to ultimatums. So if they're trying to rally the troops, if we can all band together and then we'll go down and go, hey, Apple, guess what? You're not going to do it anymore. They're going to go and just flick us away. Okay. Oh, really? Okay, fine. Let's just turn off that API now, shall we? And then you watch all the other apps just go, I'm melting. What are you going to do? It's like, so I get the fact that Apple has, to a certain extent, shades of monopoly. But again, these apps chose to, hey, I'll just use the back end of Apple, and so they could be making their own back end if they want. So it'll be, I like the idea of being able to have, if this is a way to kind of get everybody together to go, hey, what can we add to podcasting that's going to benefit everyone? Because of course everybody has their own agenda, but I like the idea. So.
Yeah, and that's the thing is it's kind of a first step towards protecting their customers' content and
Right.
to protecting the creators. It's the first step in this, and I feel that it's a relatively easy step to make.
Yeah. We kind of blended our convos between Podcast Lock and then Dave, what you're talking about, the new initiative or whatever.
The podcast index.
Yeah. We kind of went this conversation. We were talking about both things, but podcast, it's great. Like if you can, Bob, we're talking about like you need to figure out ways to protect the creators' content. And when I first saw the article and it said that people are doing this to steal dynamic advertising, dynamic insert advertising money, I was like, what? Because the way I use dynamic insertion is always sort of promote our own stuff, at least at work. And so what people are doing, if you read that and you're wondering what's going on, is people are basically downloading this episode, and they're putting it in, they're hosting it on their own maybe free site at Anchor, just uploading the MP3 because they can download it, right? It's one of the cool things about podcasting. And then they're turning on advertising and they're making as much. Every video I make on YouTube, stolen. I mean,
Seriously.
Oh yeah, I lose hundreds of thousands of views because they're stolen. And YouTube's process for fighting this kind of sucks because you have to sort of reveal private information of the person who stole your stuff. So just get a PO box is something I need to do. But yeah, it happens constantly. So
is that just because you're so incredibly sexy, or what's going on with that?
It's sick. Yeah, if by sexy you mean I want to learn how to reverse the battery and get longer charge so I can make money off this video. Yeah, sure,
right.
Real sexy stuff. No, it's because if something gets views, if something gets listens, you mentioned lore, then people are going to steal it and they're going to get $20 and they're going to do it hundreds of times. And so yeah, you have to do something. And I think it has to be more on it's definitely on I feel like it's on the host, because if you're hosting duplicate content, hopefully like YouTube, who is a host, they got bots who pick off duplicate content and they let the creator know, and then you go through the process of having that removed. So podcasts are being stolen. Anchor makes that easier because it's free. You don't have to pay for an account. That is why. And like I said, there's two sides to that. Free is good because it lets people try, but free is bad because it lets people do things like this. So,
well, it also doesn't go away. So if they quit, where it used to be, if you would quit, you'd quit paying your media host and your feed would go dead and Apple would remove you. Now you just go, never mind. And it just sits there forever.
And to me, these are problems Spotify needs to solve, since Spotify now owns Anchor.
Yeah, they made the problem.
Yeah. So, well, Dave,
Ray,
a few minutes left. Did you have?
Why don't we do let's do your story.
Whose
tell
story?
Tell everybody about the awesome microphone that you're using.
No, that's a boring story.
That's a boring story.
YouTube.com/Ray Ortega if you want to check out the review on the new. This is a nerdy audience. That's the Shure MV7. All right, we've talked for years about dynamic XLR USB microphones. First of all, there's not very many USB dynamic microphones. Most USB microphones are condenser based. You can dig into why that sucks or is not always the best. Jordan's laughing because she has one, I think, and we talked about it, and it's not always. Dave's got the Blue Yeti. This is probably a competitor to that. But the ATR 2100, the Samson Q2U, infamous mics over the last couple of years, some of the coolest podcast tech and microphones that I've seen in the last 3 to 5 years, probably. I don't know how old they are now. It feels quite old. Shure they took the SM7B, what I would say is the most ubiquitous microphone in podcasting now, and they turned it into a USB version. It's inspired by. So anyways, youtube.com/Ray Ortega if you want to see a review on that. You're hearing it now. It sounds great. I think they did a good job. It's $250, so it doesn't really compete it's going to be it's a weird spot. Like
Yeah.
for the person who wants an SM7B sound or wants an SM7B but don't want to pay $400 for the mic, $100 for the cloud lifter, $100 for the audio interface, you're stacking $600 to get into that microphone, you know, potentially. $250 all of a sudden sounds not bad. And so anyways, that is the new mic that I am using, since anyone who's made it this far probably does like to geek out on gear.
There you go.
But
and then
yeah, check it out.
My other story I can summarize in about 15 seconds.
Perfect.
There was this big Canadian survey that went on, and you have to pay for it, but they gave you a preview of it. And I was so shocked to hear this, that they looked at why people listen to podcasts, and the people, if you really want to grow an audience, entertain them and give them something new. There you go. That's it. And I was like, wow, that I never would have thought of that myself. I'm so glad I read that report. So, but that was it. People listen to podcasts to learn new stuff, and they like them more when they're entertaining. And I was like,
you know, I'd actually take a little bit from that, because we both have shows about podcasting and a show that we're both on about podcasting. I would not say the Podcaster Studio is not particularly entertaining. Like, it's me telling you probably something fairly technical for an hour about podcasting. So it gives you something new, perhaps, but it's not entertaining. You go to School of Podcasting, you're going to learn something new, and you're going to get Binky and the Wiz. Like, you're entertaining. So while you integrate those, it's a no-brainer to you because you're an entertainer while you're also a teacher. But not everyone is. That's a tough thing to do, I would say. Like, not everyone can do that, right?
Yeah. Just, to me, it just was like, and the report said, don't be boring. And I was like, oh, wow.
But I don't know.
I'm doing this for 15 years, man.
I don't know that podcasts don't cater to boring. And what I mean is that, like, if you have information to relay to someone that's very specific, very niche, and you have other people who are interested in that thing, they're probably going to consider. I don't know that you have to be entertaining. Now, could it being entertaining expose you to a wider audience, get you more?
Could be.
That's what I'm taking from that. It's like, oh, maybe we should try to be more entertaining. Here's exactly what I did with my YouTube channel. The first podcast I ever had was about basically green grocer picking produce stuff, right? And so if you go back, they're still there. The first videos were just my hands, no face, no nothing, and like poking fruit and vegetables, telling you how to choose. And I was like, this is the internet. What am I doing? Why is this so stiff and boring? I can have fun. I had my friend's kid throw fruit at me and stuff. Like, let's just go crazy and have fun, right? And so, but I had to learn that on my own. So I don't know that it's necessarily obvious to the new person that entertaining is something you need to be. I don't think it's required, but consider it. Maybe a co-host can help with that. I don't know. Bob, you mentioned a co-host a couple of times. Would you consider yourself entertaining? Do you try to be, or are you just trying to deliver a message or information?
I think that it's so important that in the process of delivering the message to be accurate with the information that you're giving. But I also think it needs to be fun. We're not afraid to, joke around on the show, tell stories that we think someone might want to want to be interested in. Otherwise, it becomes a lecture, and you'll put people. You'll see them. You'll see the drop off. We had I'm just going to say we had a booking agent on the show when we very first started doing podcasts. What are booking agents good at? They're good at talking. That's what booking agents do all the time. They're on the phone. They're talking to buyers and promoters and selling their artists. And this guy came on the show, and I said, "Hey, how you doing?" "Fine." "You like being a booking agent?" "Yeah." And I just thought, I am dead, because this, just there was no animation, no interaction there. We got through it. It was a short podcast episode, but you got to have fun. That's the whole thing. And sometimes, I'm self-deprecating. I'll beat up on myself on the show just to have fun and make a point. And the other thing too is when you get into an episode, especially with someone who's maybe never been on the show as a guest or doesn't know much about podcasting, it may take them a few minutes to loosen up. So what I'll do is, before the show starts, we'll talk for 10 or 15 minutes, and along with my show notes, I'll work on some interesting stories. And by the time we hit the record button, the cameras are on, and they're in front of the microphone, they're usually pretty loosened up enough without the use of alcohol that they're going to be somewhat fun.
That's the reason I drink.
I, on the other hand, will drink.
Jordan, I don't think
Yes.
that you're probably not. I would not call it's probably not entertaining, right? Like you're
Yeah.
not doing is not entertaining.
I'm entertaining
Okay, all right.
in
Well,
a very
don't be
boring
because I thought you're trying to get to sleep.
No, yeah, it is entertainment because I have to be able to hold the listeners' attention, but it is also my job to make sure they don't make it through my episode.
So I mean, yeah, and then I was probably completely wrong. I think maybe your show is exactly that. It is entertainment. It's not you're reading a story, right? It's not I'm not giving you something new. I'm kind of giving you something that exists in a entertaining way. So I'm completely wrong. It is, and it kind of going by what you said. I think we were recording when you talked about your audience and how it started. It kind of was kid focused, but you do have a large adult audience. So the beauty of podcasting is you really don't know who's listening, and hopefully you find out. I'm curious, how did you find that out?
I did a listener survey
Nice.
for my 1 year just recently,
Nice.
and it had a very great response. And I had people, list their children's age if their children listen to the podcast. But an overwhelming amount of listeners for my podcast were either teenagers clear up to about 60, the vast majority. And you're supposed to have a niche. You're not supposed to say my podcast is for everybody. But I think I accidentally made a podcast that is for everyone. So
yeah, I think it really depends on, right, that kind of advice. There's no way you can apply blanket advice. And I think you found, a niche, which does apply. It kind of welcomes anybody. So that's good.
And you have to be flexible in that too, because I had to adjust my category a little bit to include health so I could be on those relaxation things too.
Right. Well, I think, Dave, going off of that and Bob's advice to take this opportunity, whether it's downtime for you or not. For podcasters, it should be more uptime. You have more time to sit in your basement and podcast. Take a look at your show, right? Maybe there's something you can do. Maybe you could be more entertaining. Maybe, whatever. Work on your show. It's a good, hopefully I used to always say grow as you go. And that is the whole point. Like record, don't not record because you're trying to get it right. Record and work on it as you go. Anyways, that'll be the takeaway as we move out of here. I will say thank you and let us know where we can find your podcast. And Dave, I'll go to you first. You do get to give us a URL, but what I want you to do is reach back into that red room of yours, grab that red book of yours. And what the heck is that?
That is the book, Profit from Your Podcast, Turn Your Listeners into Livelihood, available at, you guessed it, profitfromyourpodcast.com.
Did you write that?
I did.
On it.
I wrote it. And on the back, people say it's good.
It's physical. It's like
this is a physical book. And you can actually buy a Kindle version. Audiobook is coming, probably early next year.
Makes sense.
But right now they'll give me another chance to do another launch. But the original plan was to have the audiobook come out when the book came out. But yeah, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes
Are you
move.
recording that at home on your own?
I'm recording that at home on my own. Yeah. So
is that normally how it would work, or would you normally have to go in a studio? Or
if I wasn't a podcaster, yeah.
Right.
And I mean, I've got decent gear. I'm not, going to put my Yeti 5 feet from me and try it that way. I'm using my RE320 with a noise gate, and now I don't know if you can. God bless noise gates. My heater is on right now, and it's kind of like a ever so quiet airplane. Like I hear it, but it's like I didn't have that when I was in my apartment. When the heat came on, it was pretty quiet. Now it's like just in the background. It's like So, but but at least I don't have to put up with cats.
Yeah,
but they are entertaining.
You have cats.
I have two.
I did.
Yeah.
Oh, it's another cat.
Yeah.
All right. Podcastersroundtable.com/ I'm sorry, youtube.com/podcastersroundtable. Multiple cats in this episode. It's always
they're on the website.
Yeah. That'll be the thumbnail. I was talking about thumbnails early on with Jordan, and I made her smile, and Bob, I made them be goofy so I get a thumbnail. It's gonna be the cat thumbnail. Come on,
Well,
cat
I'm
thumbnails.
I'm better with that than like me pretend picking my nose. So.
She did. That's now everyone wants to see it. I wasn't gonna include it. Now it has to be there. Also, hey, well, Jordan, thank you for joining us so much. Where can we find your show?
My show is available on all podcast apps. But yeah, it's Dreamful Podcast, and it can also be found at dreamfulstories.com.
Very cool. All right. Thank you so much. And Bob, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's always good to be had. You can find us on businesssideofmusic.com. All of our current episodes are on there, along with a blog that Tom and myself and our team write periodically. We're trying to get better on that. You can also go to our YouTube page, which is the Business Side of Music, and check out our shows there.
Very cool. Awesome. Dave and you sort of cross genres. Dave had a business music
Tom was
podcast
on my show
too, so-
many
Wow.
moons ago. Tom Segura was on the Marketing Musician podcast.
It's likely how Bob ended up here. Most people come from Dave Jackson, which is why you make your co-host someone who has influence in a popular show. Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'll use my plug to say go vote again. All right. And
Please.
it doesn't matter where in the world you are. If you can vote, do it. And we will see you next time. We're over the hump. We're just going to go 151 and keep trucking on, Dave. Let's keep doing this thing. Till
We should
someday, again, we can do it live in person.
There you go.
What?
I was going to give a shout out to Daniel J. Lewis from the Audacity to Podcast, who's not here. He's busy taking care of his family, but he was here for 150 episodes as well. So thanks to Daniel for
That's right.
making the show what it is. So, and enjoy your kid, and look at you being all responsible. So yay, Daniel.
Yeah, mine's like in the street somewhere. So, but she's older now, so she's 9. Like he's still got little ones, so
Yeah.
it's more attention. But Daniel will be back, and we'll see him for the next 150 episodes.
Yeah.
Rounds. They're called rounds, Dave. Sorry. All right. I'm kidding. I was yelling at myself, but using your name. You're a scapegoat for me, Dave. I appreciate that. 150
Glad.
more episodes. Rounds. Scapegoating. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time. Wave goodbye.